Thank you, Michael. We're now going to have a panel discussion. We'll be able to, again, take questions from the floor. There'll be microphones. The process is the same. Raise your hand and someone will come with a microphone. I want to bring the other panellists to the stage now. Tony McAvoy, Jill Gallagher, Mike Harding, Matakita Whitechase, and is Lois here? Lois Peeler? Lois? Oh, there you are. We were both wondering if you were going to get here on time. Thank you. Yep. And just before we begin the, just take the seat here. Yep. There we go. And just before we begin the discussion, I'd also like to acknowledge that the Minister, Natalie Hutchins, is here, and the Shadow Minister, Heidi Victoria, have joined us for a short period. So welcome. Thank you. Okay, well, we can begin the discussion. I want to start with going to each of the people up here and, again, just give an outline of how you see treaty, how you see that a treaty might be able to work. And Lois, if I could start with you.
Who? No.
Lois?
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't
Okay,
know.
there you go.
Look, I think I'm listening to Michael, and thank you for sharing your ideas, Michael. I think some of the things that I believe, and I work in the education sector and do some, have involvement with justice as well. And particularly from the education sector, I think that, we'd like to see Indigenous history and culture as part of the curriculum. I think, when our children are doing things like NAPLAN and it's all English, why can't we have Koori education, Koori English or Aboriginal languages? Those things that would help our children to, in the benchmark. So, look, there are many things. I think one of the things that I guess my regional, Eastern Region Council has been working on is the issue of confirmation of Aboriginality. One of the things that we are wanting to address is the matter of going to a doctor or a teacher or someone that can confirm your Aboriginality. They don't know anything about it. They're just really, it's the stat dec process is really what we're looking at. So those are just some of the things, and I think that in order for us to, have more input into these decisions, I think, and talking about the Treaty of Waitangi, which gives, we're able to look at the achievements there, and we need to be able to do that, and I think it's a great starting point to have the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Jill?
Okay, thank you. You already know my name, but I'm here as an Aboriginal woman from Western Victoria, the Gunditjmara country, Gunditjmara Nation. Sorry, Jeff. I better stick to the language that we're trying to use. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge some of the footprints that came before us. Treaty on our minds or on our agenda isn't a new concept. We've had Aboriginal people in Victoria for many years talk treaty, sovereign treaty, and I'll use Robbie Thorpe's words. And Robbie Thorpe was one of those warriors, I suppose, that has never wavered from the position of having treaty. And I remember when I first heard Robbie talk about it, and I thought, we'll never get it, so let's focus on something else. So I just needed to say that. But I support a treaty. I support a treaty, but if you had asked me 12 months ago, I would have said I support constitutional recognition, because I did support it.
Swinging voter.
Yeah, I was on the fence. No. I did support constitutional recognition at the federal level. until I got an invite to Kirribilli House. And I heard a lot of the rhetoric that was around the table. And that started to make me question what I believed in. And then I saw 3 young Aboriginal people on NITV. And the question was put to them, do they support treaty or do they support constitutional recognition? And what they answered tipped me over the edge, and basically now I do support treaty. So what they answered to me was that there is nothing legally, if we got at a Commonwealth level constitutional recognition, there is nothing legally stopping us still having treaty talks. But what it does do is it actually weakens our argument for, as a sovereign people, for a treaty. It weakens our argument. And when I heard those 3 young people talk, and I was still on the fence, by the way, tipped me right over to the other side of treaty. And hey, then I woke up. Yes, brother, I saw the lights. No, but seriously, that's where I was coming from. So, and then when I got the invite to Kirribilli House, I thought, I'll go there and just see what are they talking about. Substantive change, or are they talking about symbolic change? And what I heard was just symbolic. I also got to acknowledge that I don't think Victoria, and I'm only looking at it from a Victorian point of view, I don't think Victoria, when Robbie was well ahead of his time talking treaty and demanding sovereign right, I don't think the rest of us were on the same page, and I don't think Victorian society was on the same page. What needed to happen was some very strong footprints that came before us. And our elders before us, they made a change, and that change was us to be recognised as citizens of this country, us in the referendum. So that was I see as the most important ingredients for us to have a treaty, was to be a referendum where we're allowed to vote and be part of Australian populations. So those people who went before us and got us the referendum, I take my hat off to them. I think a treaty is doable. I really do. I think it's possible. I don't think it's too hard. I think it's complicated, but I think we can do it, and I think the time is right. I mean, someone said earlier on that they've never heard a government use the words treaty. Oh, sorry, Bob Hawke did, didn't he? He promised a treaty. He did. And then he reneged. Okay. So a government did at a national level, but I've never heard this state government use the term treaty. So I agree with Michael Mansell that there is a window there. You know, when you saw Premier Andrews talk, he didn't have to say all that. I really think the timing is right for us, and I think it's doable. But we've got to be heavily involved, and we've got to lead the way. I think a treaty, and Michael, some of the comments you made about legally binding, I don't know much about that. I'm not a scholar in that area. But whatever we do, I think we need to have bipartisan support from all governments. I note that we have Heidi Victoria in the audience, the shadow opposition minister. So whatever we end up with, we do need that bipartisan support. I think the government commit to start negotiate. I think, and this I know, and this is only my brainstorming, by the way. I don't have all the answers, and I don't pretend to be a scholar on treaty. But what I do know is that we need to, and I take Gary Murray's comments earlier on, it has to be with, and I'm using different language here, either the TO groups, the clan groups, the registered Aboriginal parties. We've already got a foundation there. It's not complete and it's not perfect, but we have a foundation, and we should use it. So we're lucky. We're in the lucky state. A lot of other states don't have that infrastructure already there to allow the traditional owner groups, the clan groups, to start negotiating with the governments. I believe we don't have to have one treaty. I believe we can have multiple treaties. I believe there should be one overarching, and tell me when my 5 minutes is up, Stan.
I think the 5 minutes. Yep.
5 minutes?
5 minutes ago. 5 minutes ago, but
I might take a leaf out of
it's
Rob
all
Hull's
interesting.
book,
Keep going.
if you don't mind. I'll take a leaf out of Rob Hull's book. I think he went for 20 minutes, didn't he? No. But I believe
we extended the session. It's good.
I believe we can have one overarching statewide treaty, but the very first ask in that treaty is that the government commit to negotiate with local TOs and clan groups about local treaties. So you can have one overarching state one and local treaties. I don't believe it's too hard, and I'm not the expert to work it out. I believe as part of the state treaty we can have some asks in there about, and my language is not right, but a future fund. Look what happened in New South Wales when the state government there, I don't know the detail, but they said we'll give you a percentage of the land tax and put it into a future fund. I believe we can have that here, and no piddly little $1 million. And the future fund could be governed by the gathering of the traditional owner groups, where a statewide authority come together, however that's elected or developed, that's the voice. I believe a statewide treaty should have also scholarships for Aboriginal people in Victoria on a regular basis, not just in the higher ed but also in the TAFE sector. I believe Aboriginal studies should be part of our curriculum. It should be compulsory. And I believe traditional owner groups should be supported to develop that curriculum. That aspects of culture be embedded in town planning. When you walk across the landscape of Victoria, what do you see? Not a lot, that there are 50,000 Aboriginal Victorians in Victoria. We want roads named after us. We want buildings that have Aboriginal designs embedded in them. And the traditional owner groups play a part at a fee for service to help those developers to embed culture in town planning across Victoria. I believe there should be a parliamentary committee that reports direct to Parliament about the monitoring, the implementation of whatever we decide. I believe there should be affirmative action in the Victorian state government where a certain amount of seats are assigned for Aboriginal Victorians. I believe treaties or treaty or both should be legislated. I believe there should be tax relief for all Aboriginal people who live in Victoria, whether you're Victorian or not. Australia is the only Commonwealth country that doesn't have a treaty with First Nations peoples. I believe governments need to provide resources to TO groups, clan groups and RAPs so that they can reach out to their members, because these clan groups and these traditional owner groups need to be inclusive, not exclusive. We need to be able to have informed discussions with our own TO groups. So I believe that this state government, the next step, and I think Stan asked for the next step, where after tomorrow, what's one of the next steps? I think the ask should be that this state government resource all the TO groups so that they can start having conversations with their traditional owner members, so they can start talking about what does treaty mean for them, so they can start having access to the experts like Michael Mansell, like, lawyers, treaty experts, that you have the resources there to pay for that. And I'll finish off in saying that in other parts of the world, such as South Africa, Rwanda, those countries were devastated by racist laws. But after apartheid was abolished in South Africa, They had war crime tribunals. They had courts to hold people responsible or accountable for their crimes. In Rwanda, it wasn't war crimes, but it was crimes against humanity. But no one has been held accountable in this country for the crimes against humanity to our peoples. And it's got to start now.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. Well, Jill was talking about the need for expertise and legal minds. Tony McAvoy is precisely that. Of course, he does a lot of work with native title and has thought a lot about treaty and what a treaty may look like in a legal, workable sense. Tony?
Thank you, Stan. I pay my respects to the traditional owners of this country. I feel particularly honoured to have been asked to come and speak to you today. I pay my respects to the elders and here present, and I acknowledge that it is Sorry Day. I am a Wirri man. My grandfather's country is west of Rockhampton, and I'm also a native title holder through my grandmother's side in southwestern Queensland, Cullalee people. I'm a native title barrister, and I have been doing that for a long time. Over the last few years, I became particularly disgruntled with the outcome from native title for the people I was representing and for my own family. I started delivering papers a number of years ago about the need for some collective representation for all of us. My belief is that at some point we will get to a stage where we have something that I've called an Assembly of First Nations, a National Assembly. I believe that that was necessary for two things. One, to allow us to speak with the federal government at a government-to-government level. And secondly, that when we are collectivised, when we are operating together and singing with a single voice, that is when we are at our strongest. And I believe that it was only through putting ourselves in our strongest position that we would be able to crash through this artificial wall that's been established at the federal level and at the state levels to keep us oppressed and deny us our proper place in society. Now, I was surprised when I heard the announcement last year of the Victorian government. I was pleased for you all, and I just couldn't believe that you'd done such a marvellous job. However, having reached this point, I think now comes the hard work. You've got to figure out what it is that you want. My view is that together, collectively, in Victoria, all the First Nations working in unison can get the best outcome possible for all of you. You can do that under an overarching agreement with individual nation treaties that follow, or you can do that with a single treaty but with agreements between yourselves as to how business is done internally. I don't say, and I'm not here to tell you which is better. I do say, though, that from my perspective, as a Murray, I think that the ultimate result for all of us would be comprehensive final agreements with both the state government and the federal government. You heard just a few moments ago discussions about tax relief. Well, there's only certain taxes that the states charge. The rest of the taxation responsibility under the Constitution sits with the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth deals with issues such as citizenship, and if you want dual citizenship, well then you need an agreement with the Commonwealth. But having said that, the large bulk of what I see for my people as a future, we need to get from the state. The state governments are the successors to the British colonies that were created over our lands. And it is the land and culture which the Premier spoke about this morning, returning to us and allowing us to prosper in respect of the state governments are the ones in control of those lands. I agree pretty much with most things Michael Mansell has said, which is strange. Both of us being lawyers, we have a tendency to find something to disagree about, even if there's nothing. But I tend to agree with most of what he said. The task ahead of you, the immediate task, I think, is figuring out how each of you, in your own nations, in your own groups, you don't have to call them nations, it's not up to me how you label yourself, but how you put yourselves in a position to be able to say to the government at some point in the not too distant future, yes, we do want to participate in this together, or no, we don't. That's the difficult thing that you have to grasp. You've got to understand that apart from the fear that we've heard in the room this morning and people have expressed about the unknown, the government and the mainstream population are fearful too. And we, in particular you, as First Nations people, have the capacity to show leadership and to lead the government and show it the way to this new future. I've spent a fair bit of time thinking about what might go into a treaty. Michael Mansell's covered most of that, but having that discussion for the sake of the discussion itself is fairly limiting. I try to think about it in terms of where I want my children and grandchildren to be in 30 years' time. What I want their future to be. What partnership do I want my mob, my kids, my grandkids to have with the government in 30 years' time? How do I get my people, and how do my people with me get to a place where we have dignity and respect and prosperity and health and cultural enrichment? How do we do that? And we've got to figure out, and this is the next task after you sort out how you engage. The next task, I think, is to start thinking about where each of your nations wants to be, because it's going to be different. And you think about where you want to be, and then you figure out, okay, what can we get out of this treaty process that will help us to get there? It's not going to give you everything. Don't expect it to give everything. It's not a magic bullet, but you can get substantial assistance out of what I think, and I understand, is likely to be on offer. And what you do with that and how you manage that is up to you. It's a matter of self-determination, but you've got to be able to articulate it. And, you know, I have this idea that my family and my people, rather than being the sickest people in the community and the people with the poorest educational outcomes, will be the smartest people in any room they go into and will be the healthiest, strongest people, because that's how I remember my grandparents. They were smart people. They were strong people. And so it's a hard process coming out of what's happened to us, the atrocities that we've been forced to endure. And there's a lot of soul searching that we have to do individually and within our own mobs. But it's a matter for you whether you want to engage in this process. But as Michael Mansell has said and others have said, it appears that there is an opportunity presented to you which I wish was presented perhaps across the country. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. We'll come to, I know people have got questions, we'll come to them in just a minute. I just want to just allow the final two panels up here to have their say, and then we'll come to it. Matakita Whitechaste, and then we'll go over and hear what Mike has to say as well.
Tēnā rā koutou e, nā mihi kia koutou e, o ki wairua rā e nā mate whārikitia, I runga I tēnei whenua e, o ki wairua rā koutou e. Kia ora, my name is Matikita Whitechaste. I hail from tribal affiliations in Aotearoa, from Ngāi Tūhoi, in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, Ngāti Awa, also from my mother's side in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, and Te Arawa, which is in the central part of the North Island, further down from the Eastern Bay of Plenty. So those are my tribal affiliations. I just want to pay acknowledgement to your land, to your maunga, to your awa that's out there, the Yarra River. Pay acknowledgements to those who have passed on, pay acknowledgements to your elders here present, and to your future generations that are yet to arrive. And I just am blessed to be here today to be able to share with you about our treaty, what we call Te Treaty o Waitangi, that was signed in 1840 by our ancestors. A treaty that was signed in 1840, and the treaty since 1840 to 2016 has been a journey of challenges, has been a journey of forever having to come back to the table to negotiate, renegotiate, to lay down things that have been left. Sometimes our ancestors couldn't speak to some of the grievances that they encountered, so they left those for another generation to address. And generations have continued to address grievances. In the addressing of grievances, we've tried to find ways that would work, that would produce better outcomes for us. But one of the things I want to say is maintain your mana, your personal mana, as well as your collective mana. Maintain that. That's uniquely who you are as an Indigenous individual, as well as Indigenous collective. We've maintained who we are, our identity. We've held on and connected with our lands and what the lands mean to us, to our forefathers, and why we fought so hard to maintain those lands. The stories that the lands hold for us. The bones that our ancestors buried in the land, as well as in the caves. And all those significant, precious things to us, we fight for that. We fight for our river because our river sustains us, has sustained us over the years, has fed us. Those are our cupboards. We fight for the land because we plant, we gather, we grow, we harvest. We fight for the bush, for the ngahere, because that's where our hunters gather food from. And I know you have a very similar strong attachment to the land, to the rivers, to the mountains, to the forest, and maintain those. You have stories that you've learned over the years. We have stories, and we continue to tell our next generation those stories so that they understand the journey from past to present and into the future. The treaty for you, you will determine what the treaty will be for you. You know where you've come from, and you know where you're heading to. And because you know that, you have an idea of how you want to scope that out. And it's going to take discussions, more discussions, negotiations, more negotiations. We've been on this journey for over 175 years and we still haven't got there yet. It's a work in progress, we're still getting there. We've made some gains along the way, but we've also had some losses. And I just say to you, I just encourage you to keep, to maintain who you are as a people, to maintain that, to hold strongly to that as to who you are, your mana, and keep that as your forevision as you progress and move into the future. Keep that as your forevision for you, and you know what that is. I don't know what that is. I can only assume, but you know what that is. And I'm just, listening to the other speakers as the panellists as they spoke, and the passion that I can hear coming through about needing to have this treaty, needing to entrench for yourselves, and needing to consolidate for you as a nation your rights as a nation, your rights as First Nations to this land. And I can hear that coming through in all of the speakers, and I say, fight the good fight. Stand strong in what you believe in. And be proud of who you are. Be proud of who you are. I don't really have much more to say than that. Kia ora, thank you very much for that.
Finally, Mike, you say a few words and then we'll open up to questions. Thank you.
Look, I'd just like to firstly say, Kulin Tongwarang Nikharing, Gingala Woiwarang Lewak Ba Elders, Gingala Bunmarang Lewik Ba Elders, and Gingala Nugunganyan Ba Lewik Ba Elders. And I'm just paying my respects to the first people of this land here first, and to everyone else in the room, their elders, their ancestors, and the rest, everyone else as well. I've just got a few points. I think they've already been probably touched upon, but everyone else has had the opportunity to say it, so I'll say it, so bear with me. I think it's about a treaty with the First Peoples. I think whether it's by clan, by language group, by nation groups, I think that's to be worked out in the future. And I think what Jill said serves that if it's an overarching thing and then gets more specific to the groups, that's for us to sort of sort out as we go into the future. And I think that some of the basic pillars are we need to have access to our land and we need to have access to our language and to teach ourselves and our children about that land and about that language and how that language comes from the land. So we need to do that. We need to have resources to look after ourselves. I don't know what shape that looks like, but we certainly need that. We live in a modern society. We're not contemporary. For traditions to continue to go into the future, they need to be dynamic. And so here we are today in the 21st century, and we're living a lifestyle. It doesn't mean we're anything less than traditional owners. That's what I believe. We also need to have a political voice. I don't know what shape that is either, but I think that in the future, I'd like to think that we have voices in Parliament, so we can question the politicians from our end about keeping them accountable to the things that they've promised us, whether it's by treaty or by whatever other ways that this thing, a treaty, might be. And the last thing I suppose I want to say is that I'm really interested in who chooses either this interim working group that becomes a full working group or a commission or whatever it might look like. I'm interested in, I suppose, some answers to that. And I don't know whether that's us. I think that's probably us collectively deciding those types of things. But we need to believe in those people that we choose. And we also need to have a clear communication, some sort of communication strategy that not only how we deal with one another in a commission or a working group or whatever it might be, but how we get that information back out to people to test drive some of these ideas to see how much traction they've really got. And that's probably all I've got to say.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. Thank you all of our panellists. So we can open up the questions. As I say, there are 4 microphones around, and we'll try to get a broad cross-section of people from all sides of the place. We'll start over here, and then we'll come over to this side.
Hello. My name's Adam Frogley. I'm Tunarong from Hillsville. Just one of the questions I had is more about the beginnings of this process and to enshrine this process, because what concerns me as a trade unionist and someone who negotiates collective agreements on a regular basis with universities is the point that's been made already about currently we have a government that is listening to Aboriginal communities here in Victoria. What happens when we have a change of government? What is going to be the process that is, or what is going to be the document, or what is going to be that process again that's going to enshrine all these discussions and all this work that's going on here into the future? We have another election in 2018 or whenever it is for the state government. How do we know that potentially another government could come in and thwart this process? Now, I know all you mob in this room, you don't want to be going down this path every two years or having the rug pulled out from underneath you. This causes a lot of pain, causes a lot of distress. We even look at the issue of, where we're meeting and what day it is we're meeting today. So it needs to be considered about this, but we need to have something. I don't want to see all this work go into a treaty and then all of a sudden have another government come in and pull it out from underneath us. What do you think that's going to do to our mob here in Victoria? How do you think we're going to be viewing the government, doesn't matter which colour you are, into the future? So I'd like to know what it is, before we even embark upon the process of getting down to tin tacks about anything to do with treaty, we need to make sure that this process is locked in and that we're not going to have this taken away from us.
Okay, I'll just direct the question first to Michael, because, Michael, you've been involved in these discussions around the state, and you've no doubt seen you've also been involved in negotiating agreements with governments in your own state of various persuasions, and you've seen how difficult that can be when that confronts a political reality, especially around election time. There is 18 months here before the next election. What are the steps that could be involved in getting interim agreements potentially in place, draft agreements? You spoke potentially of holding government accountable to goodwill measures, such as return of lands as a beginning of the process. So what are the stages here where you could lock in a government to commitments ahead of a political schedule before the next election?
Yeah, look, it's true that there's insecurity about legislation, but there's also security about legislation. There's a lot of laws in Victoria that have been in place for a long time. There's nothing inherent about an Aboriginal treaty that says, the moment you get into change of government, therefore it's gone. The second thing is that if the current government negotiated a treaty, got it through the Parliament, and it became part of the law of Victoria, Aboriginal people, as a result of that becoming law, would gain a certain set of rights, including rights over land, rights to do other things. And if a government came along then and took away the source of those rights, it doesn't mean that you would lose those rights themselves. You've already acquired them. So if they said we want to compulsorily reacquire the land that you got back, they may not be able to do it because of the Racial Discrimination Act. And so there are these protections. There's nothing simple about the law. But I think the main point that, I can talk all day about how this tricky bit of law, that tricky bit of law can be used to our advantage. But Tony made the real point. If you believe that this is not going to go anywhere, don't do it. If you believe this is worthwhile working on, get stuck into it. And out of it come a number of benefits. One is the potential of actual rights that Aboriginal people can get. And secondly, it brings people together. Look at this meeting here. This is a great gathering of people. there have been some really positive vibes and statements made in this meeting. And if during this process there is a sort of a unification of Aboriginal groups and traditional owners and building a representative body, that's got to be a positive outcome. And even if you get to the stage in 2017 or 18, whatever it is, and the Victorian government says, whoa, I didn't know you're going to bring up all of that stuff, but we'll give you this stuff, at least that's an advance. So it might not be perfect, but it's an advance.
Yeah, Tony, make a quick statement on that, and then we'll come across to the next question.
I would just add that ideally you'd be in a position to have some level of agreement in principle or framework agreement that sets out the broad parameters of what you want to do and the process for achieving the final outcome by 12 months out from the next election, so that as far as possible you try and keep it out of the election debate. But when I was speaking before, I mentioned the fear on the other side of the fence. I don't think you can necessarily assume that the opposition would abandon this process once commenced. But you, I think, have an important role in saying, okay, these are the things we want, and these are how we achieve them. This is how we achieve them. Show them the way, and I think there's at least a chance that you can bring the right opposition with you. But if you don't get to a position where you've got some process and some broad principles by the end of this term of government, then you're really losing control of your destiny, because you're putting your destiny in the hands of the electorate. And if the government changes, then everything might change. You don't know. So you've got to do what you can to minimise all of those risks. And I think if you want to, that you should be able to do that.
Thank you, Tony. Question over this side, and then we'll come across the other side of the room.
Hello. Hi. Arika Walu, Gunai Gunijmara, Chitgan Garawangu, Burun Garawangu. My question is, what type of treaty are we referring to and intend on making? Is this going to be a sovereign treaty, or is this going to be a corporate treaty? Because there's a really big difference. And in the fact sheet, it kind of doesn't really talk about a sovereign treaty. So I assume we're making a corporate treaty, and that's really important for our people to know that right now, that this is a corporate treaty that we're talking about and we're being informed about.
What sort of... Yeah, good question. I'll put what sort of treaty? Who would like to speak to that, Michael?
I can't say it's a corporate treaty. Within Federation, the Commonwealth Government, when it goes overseas, is the only sovereign power. The states can't go over and bind Australia to whatever deals they do with China or whatever. But within Australia, the states share sovereignty. So a treaty made with the Victorian government is making an agreement with a sovereign government. It's implicit, may not be open, but at least implicit, that the Victorian government is acknowledging Aboriginal people as a sovereign people by having a treaty. So it's, I can't see where the word corporate comes into it.
Sorry, I didn't get to finish. I didn't get to finish what I was saying. As far as I'm aware, the government, the Australian government, was registered as a corporation in 2006, and each state is now acting under an ABN. So that's where corporate comes from. I don't know if that's been very transparent, but it's the truth.
Yeah. The state of Victoria was created out of the colony of New South Wales, and that's how they assert their sovereignty, the acquisition of sovereignty by the arrival of the First Fleet with the Orders in Council. That's how it's asserted. We know that that is factually wrong. We all know that. The government knows that. How we move from that position to a position of respect for us as First Nations is the question. I've spent a bit of time on this, but I don't hold myself out as an expert, but I can tell you that if we were to descend into legal arguments about the consequences of an admission by the state that their sovereignty is flawed, we could spend decades arguing about that. It seems to me that the way in which we can I finish?
Yeah.
It seems to me that the way in which we can deal with it is by acknowledging that there is a contested sovereignty, and notwithstanding the contested sovereignty, we agree, or in your case, you agree with the government to move forward in a new relationship.
Yeah. Okay. I don't disagree with moving forward, but we need to be informed, and we need to be people need to be transparent who we're dealing with. Like, how is this being funded? You know, that hasn't been very transparent today. Yeah. So.
Okay, we'll take another question. But Jason, would you mind just the broader question here about the role of the government? Would you want to speak to that and right now, or? Okay, all right, no, that's fine. That's fine. Okay.
I just want to ask, what should we be lobbying for? A corporate treaty or sovereign treaty? Okay. So that's what we're pushing for.
I think that's the point that Michael has made,
Yeah.
that given the nature of our federalism, given the fact that states have a sovereignty that devolves from the federal government, that negotiation with a sovereign state government implicitly is a negotiation with another sovereign people. I think that's implicit in the overall discussion. A question over this side, and then we'll come back over here.
Yeah, I've got the microphone. Look,
Yep.
I suppose my major concern is with the treaty. Look, I'm all for treaty, don't get me wrong, but I suppose the process of it, and there's been a lot of talk about it going through native title groups and so forth, and I see that I'm not being negative, I'm being positive about what I'm about to say, and I don't really feel that it should go through native title groups. At the moment, native title groups, the native title legislation, not just necessarily the groups, have failed us miserably. They have caused nothing but division and feuds within our Aboriginal culture. It's done nothing to bring any communities together. If anything, it's just divided. And to think that, and to even entertain the thought of this treaty being in the hands of native title entities is just absolute suicide. I couldn't think of anything more horrifying because not everyone is part of native title groups, and native title does not represent everybody. Everybody is not in a native title group, and this isn't a personal attack. This is a reality of a government legislation that has been made, and it is divided and created division. And if we are going to put a treaty in the hands of a native title entity, any entities, we're going to have nothing except more division, and I just absolutely cringe to think that our native title entities could actually make decisions for us as a nation.
Yes, good. Who would like to? Yeah, here.
Look, I don't have any idea, but how would you see it going? How would you, if it's not clan groups or traditional owner groups, how would you see it going? Nah, won't get nothing.
I think that we should have a referendum. I don't think that this should be going through a referendum within Aboriginal Victoria, because not everybody is involved in cultural heritage or native title groups, but everyone still wants to have a say in their culture and heritage, but they're not giving. Oh, look, I'm not even going to go on about the reflection of our native title group, because I tell you what, I'll be here all day, but I'm not going to do that. And because the native title groups are just don't reflect. They do not reflect clan groups whatsoever. They are a corporation, but they do not represent clan groups. And look, I can bring back tomorrow. I can bring a paper and disseminate it to everyone about what's been happening within our native title group, our Gunditj Damara, and we are not represented. Clan groups are not represented at all. It's a disgrace.
Well, Tony's been involved with native title. As Tony said, he's grown disenchanted with the way that works. But how could this work, Tony, as an alternative to the native title process?
I'll say this straight up. I don't think you are bound to go through the native title groups. Native title is a construct of the Australian legal system. It is not your entity. It is not your existence as a group. You are who you are. You are your nation, your clan. Nobody else can tell you that. But the problem is that over the next little while, you're going to have to figure out how you can engage together and deal with that. And that's the difficulty. The question you've raised goes right to the heart of what I was asking you to think about earlier. How you formalise yourself into structures that are representative of your clan or nation or however you want to call it.
You're talking about being collective and as family clans and all that sort of stuff. But when we're talking culturally, we come from clan groups. We've got maps. Our country has got 58 different clan groups, but none of them are represented. Not one person has authority over their clan groups where I come from down home. Not one person. So how can this be formulated without the construct of native title determining our culture and heritage?
I can't answer that for you.
Well, this is something that the government really needs to consider and really take serious, because otherwise it's just not going to happen. It's not going to work out. Our treaty is going to be Clayton's.
Can I put it to you another way? I really don't think the government has to sort it out. I think the government has to resource you, and you have to sort it out, unfortunately. Yes. And look, I'll say this. What native title does is sometimes forces groups together which shouldn't be together because they've got to meet the native title law. Sometimes it splits groups that should be together. But sometimes the native title group is representative of the mob, and sometimes I'm not saying that it happens all the time, but I'm saying I know of cases where different mobs through their native title group are really functioning well, and they're making advances for their people. But that doesn't mean that they don't have big arguments internally. You've got to have that. So I'm not saying toss native title out altogether. All I'm saying is you're not bound by it, but if it works for you, use it. If it doesn't, well, make the representative body that suits your mob and label yourselves accordingly.
Okay, we got one more question here. After this, we're going to go to a break, but then there's going to be a workshop on the treaty. There'll be a workshop, group activity, and people can work through so many of these issues in greater detail. So, a question here, and then we can go to a break.
My clans would probably concur with a lot of those native title settlements for lots of reasons. There's some good ones, some bad ones, but essentially I think after 23 years of the Native Title Act, we need a Royal Commission right across this country. We need a Royal Commission into whether it's good for us or bad for us. But my question is about jurisdiction. Treaty is simply an agreement. It's a contract. In the contract, there is usually a clause about what jurisdiction do the parties agree to in the event of a dispute or breach. And with breaching, there's also huge penalties. And you can imagine what sort of penalties we could levy on the state or any other future government. But my question about jurisdiction is this. Why enact legislation at a state level when maybe we can use the federal jurisdiction? And if we agree, we could even use an international jurisdiction, maybe the United Nations, maybe the International Court of Justice. Seeing that we've got 3 lawyers up there, pro bono, can you give us a bit of advice on that?
Okay, there you go. Who wants to give the free legal advice?
In one form or another, brother, we're all on the government payroll. Look, a treaty made with the Victorian government is a negotiated outcome of this depends on the art of the compromise. If the Victorian government comes to you and says, we're not going to change anything, but we'll give you little trinkets, it's obviously not a treaty, you walk away. And that's not the way to negotiate. But if Aboriginal people go to the government and say, we want all of these things that are outside the reach of government, even if they agreed with them, it's not the way to negotiate an agreement. So the point I'm making is, be aware of the political realities. The government can only give you stuff that's within reach. If people go along and say, Michael Mansell's all on about sovereignty, we want sovereignty as it was in 1788, the government will say, we can't give it to you. We just can't do it. Unless someone can explain here how they could do it. The jurisdiction, Gary, it would be under the state, because the Victorian state law can't go outside Victoria, of course. Look, I agree, it would be better if there was a federal treaty that gave all Aboriginal people all around the country a bit of justice. But this is the only offer on the table. And so you have to decide whether you run with it or not. The international stuff, yeah, there are problems with that, but yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Anyone else?
Yeah, look, I agree with what Michael's saying, but I would add that it would be open to you and perhaps prudent to draft whatever agreement you are going to enter into in a way that it can be accommodated within some subsequent federal agreement, so that it's not something that makes a later agreement with the federal government impossible. The other question you've asked about is about jurisdiction, and it's a good question. The history of the implementation of the Treaty of Waitangi tells us that treaties are broken, and that you have to go to court and enforce them, and you have to go to court and get them interpreted. There is a question about what decision-making body you would identify in any agreement, and it may be that you would rather than you certainly, in my view, you wouldn't go to the Victorian Supreme Court to argue a treaty dispute. You'd go to some perhaps international forum, see if you could get jurisdiction in an international body. You might try commercial arbitration as the first port of call. Commercial arbitration is very sophisticated, with corporations using it now that are much larger than the Victorian economy, and it's an option. But these are details that you will have to consider well down the track.
And all these details we'll be able to discuss. We're going to break now. There is then in rooms 212 and 213, I think at about 4 o'clock, the beginnings of a workshop on treaty, group activities, where all the questions that you've wanted to ask here today, or some of the detail you want to drill down on, you'll have some time to do it. Thank you. Thanks everyone on the panel as well. Thank you.